Hi everybody, I hope that you are well into Oryx and Crake and that you're enjoying it and loving it the way I do. If you're feeling confused and frustrated, that's okay. That's exactly where Atwood wants you to be. She's throwing all of these really weird scenarios at us and we're just supposed to go with the flow until we find out what's going on. Instead of doing a 3-2-1 myself this week and giving you a couple of things to think about, I thought that this would be a more effective way to start off the book. So I know it's going to be a little bit long, but bear with me and really take the time to listen to these things that I'm going to go over to give you my own insights, but also to fill you in on some of the hints and the clues that you may have missed as you've read so far. Atwood is one of those writers where, when she's writing, every single thing is important. Everything. She doesn't make accidents or mistakes. So if she uses one word instead of another, there's a reason for that. All of her little random statements are meaningful. So it's your job as readers and my job as a reader to figure out why they're important and what's going on. So I'm just going to run you through those first 75 pages and pull out some of the things that I think are important for you to focus on. And I love what I'm seeing in your 3-2-1 so far, but I want to add some of the depth that I'm not seeing as much that hopefully will come up in some of those questions that you guys have. So, one of the things that I think is really important is the narration, right? It doesn't have that very typical, start at, trying to do it on the webcam, start at the background and then to go up with your rising action and then the climax at the top and then down and then over, right? It doesn't have all of those standard steps of plot, the exposition, the rising action, the climax, the falling action, and the resolution. Instead, Atwood starts somewhere after the climax and then bounces back and forth with flashbacks that Snowman has. So it's a lot harder to put together the pieces that way because we're seeing like this now with Snowman and then this before with Jimmy, and eventually they're going to collide. So what I want you to do is you read that when it might get a little confusing. It'll always say Snowman if it's now and Jimmy if it's before. Um, but I think it's really important that you count the number of days that are happening in Snowman's when, right? How much time is passing from the first page of the novel until the end, and why is that important? You'll get years and years within the flashbacks, but Snowman's time frame is very different, so pay attention to that. Another thing that's important to keep in mind is that this is Atwood's grim prediction of our future, right? So after we've read Biopunk, we know very well some of the crazy stuff that's going on in society today, and everything that she's bringing up in this novel is either already happening scientifically in biotech world or it's just about to happen, right? So a lot of the stuff that's coming up is actually there and is already being done, and whether or not that's right or wrong is kind of what she leaves up to us to determine. So consider that as well. Okay, let's talk about some of the characters. Snowman. I don't know what you guys are thinking about him right now. And a normal first thought is, oh my God, he's crazy because he just keeps spouting all of these random quotes that he knows. And so we think, well, what's wrong with him? Does he have multiple personality disorder? Is he bipolar? Is he schizophrenic? What's going on with him? Can we trust him? And the answer is, yeah, you can trust him. Sometimes, most of the time. He's not crazy, right? He's really well read. Just in the same way where if I were to say a phrase to you, it might make you think of a song or a movie. We do it all the time. So because we're looking at the world within Snowman's head, we're getting all of those quotes. Only with Snowman, they're books, right? So that tells us that he's really smart and he's really well read. And for whatever reason, he was an avid reader at one point in his life, where most of us could probably throw out quotes from Top Gun and Avatar and Iron Man and whatever, right? Snowman uses, ancient anthropological texts. So he's a very different person. He's also all by himself for the most part, right? He says at one point that he just would love to hear the voice of a fully human, right? A full human talking to him, which is a clue to some of the other stuff going on. But he's lonely. And if you were all by yourself, it wouldn't take very long before you would start talking to yourself. And it's a way to keep sane. So as he has these random thoughts and these random quotes, it's actually him maintaining his sanity rather than showing us that he is insane. Okay, so there's that. What about the children that are running around on the beach? What do we know about them? Well, we know a lot, and it should make us pretty concerned and suspicious, right? We know that they're all naked, that they are all perfect, that they have all different colored skin, and yet They have the same green eyes, the same exact shade of green eyes, every single one of them. We know that they'll never have any body hair. We know that they have no knowledge of whatever came before, right? So they come up with things like broken mouse, things and piano keys, and they have no concept of what this stuff is. And so they come to Snowman for those explanations. So how long have they been around? Can we figure that out? We also find out that they're not going to be able to read. None of them read. And so for someone like Snowman, who's so exceptionally well read, to know that these people, whoever and whatever they are, who seem to be the only sort of people left, don't read, is something that we should be thinking about and the importance of that. Um, yeah. And Snowman seems to have this special role with them, and we're not sure why he has that role or who gave him that role, but he says something between like an uncle and a benevolent uncle and a scholar and a soothsayer, right? So he's like, this should be his role. And he makes up these stories. And when they don't understand something, he just makes up a fiction about it. So how he got to be in that place with that power over them, we don't know yet either. So it's something to think about. Crake, we don't know a lot about him yet, but we've already gotten some really big hints about who he is and why he's important. A couple of things. On page 7, it says that Snowman named himself Snowman because he was breaking one of Crake's rules. And so Crake had this rule about names where you couldn't have a name unless there was a physical equivalent for that name, right? So I could be named White Rhino because there is such a thing as a white rhino, but I couldn't be Shiny Unicorn because there is no physical equivalent in the known world to an actual unicorn, right? Or mermaid or griffin. So because the abominable snowman is something of myth and legend, it was Snowman's way of sort of sticking it to Crake's rule, which is all fine and dandy, except for that we have to wonder then, why did Crake make this rule? How in charge was he and of whom and for how long so that he could make up what kind of names people had? I mean, all of these things should be coming into our heads. We know that Snowman's not very happy with him as he's screaming, Crake, you shit for brains, and all of these things that he's yelling at the ocean and at the sky. Something happened. They had a falling out. Okay, but at the beginning of the book, it seemed like they were friends, which is also a little suspicious because Crake shows up just a couple of months before Jimmy's mom leaves. And as Snowman's, recalling this, he's like, what was the connection? Was it a coincidence? What was going on here? Also, that Jimmy's mom thought that Crake was a really stand-up guy. And yet it says that Jimmy had never seen them have an interaction or a conversation together. But she keeps saying, oh, wow, Crake, you can actually have a conversation. He's so much smarter than your other friends. He's so much better than your other friends. And Jimmy's like, okay, but when have you ever talked to the guy? So we can ask ourselves that, when indeed. What else? Oh, on page something. On page 40 of the novel, there's a really important statement about Crake. It's about halfway down the page. And he's talking about the games that he and Crake played. They all used parallel strategies. You had to see where you were headed before you got there, but also where the other guy was headed. Crake was good at those games because he was a master of the sideways leap. So master of the sideways leap, what does that mean? Well, it's like when you play chess, right? When you play chess, you don't just think about the next move you're making. You think 3 moves or 4 moves or 5 moves or 6 moves in advance. And you're predicting where you're going to go step after step after step, but also where your opponent is going to go. And Jimmy says that Crake was the master of that, of thinking that you were going to do one thing or having your opponent think you were going to do one thing, but instead you jump sideways when they think you're going to go forward, right? So that's a pretty big insight into Crake, and we don't even know him yet, but we know that he played these strategy games and he loved them, and he was the master of the sideways leap. So just keep that in mind as well. What else? Well, we learn about the Pigoons and all of the work that's being done. The world that Jimmy grows up in is quite different from our own, but it sounds like we're moving in that direction. There's these compounds and these cities, and we don't have that yet, but we're kind of building it, right? So the compounds are these areas, and this is where Jimmy lives, where there's work, but also there's the housing, and there's the school, and there's the mall, and there's the stores, and there's the doctors, and it's all surrounded by a wall, right? So they're all locked in, and on top of that wall, there's guards and searchlights. It sounds a little like a prison, only they think that it's keeping them safe, right? So they'd never have to leave. Jimmy had never been outside of the compounds when he was growing up because that's where they were safe. And the cities, which would be us, right? Everyone outside of, I'm in San Jose, we're the city where the plebe lands, where everything's crazy and psychotic and whatever. While we don't have those yet, right, it's clearly coming. If you work for Google, for instance, or you work for Apple, or you work for Facebook, oh, my little bird is coming to say hello. Those corporations make it so you never have to leave, right? Google employees, they will wash your clothes, they wash your car, they bring in a dentist, there's a gym, there's, free food all the time with a 5-star chef. They are making it so you don't have to leave. There are actually certain companies where you have to sign on for a certain time to stay in, like Google's, I think it's their X project building in Mountain View, right? When you go in, they're working on all their high tech stuff, and you can't leave. You have to stay until the project's released to the public because they're afraid that the information's going to get out and somebody else is going to get it. So that's what's going on with the compounds in the book. But you can see that we're kind of moving in that direction right now in reality, and that's one of the things that Atwood is warning us about. So within those compounds, there's all sorts of biotech stuff going on, and a lot of them involve pigoons or really big pigs, right? And so Jimmy mentioned several things that are happening. One is that they are are growing human kidneys inside of pigoons. And okay, so maybe we think that's good and maybe we think that's bad. It's actually happening in Japan right now. It's one of their main projects is growing human kidneys inside of pigs. So you can Google that and see that it's actually occurring. Later on in the story, before the end of our section that we read, Jimmy's dad is really excited because he's learned to grow human neocortex tissue inside of the pigoons. Well, what is human neocortex tissue? It's brain tissue growing inside of pigs. So is that a line that's been crossed? It's something you guys can think about. Is this something that is too dangerous to be happening? Are there any sort of implications that might occur from growing brain tissue, human brain tissue, inside of pig brains? I don't know. So so these are all the things that are happening. And yet now that Snowman is sort of by himself and the pigoons, for whatever reason, are no longer in the compounds, they're roaming around, he says, wow, their tusks are coming back, and yet they weren't bred to have tusks. And so these creations have sort of morphed back into their natural states, right? And then it's not only pigoons. At so a certain part of the book, Jimmy's talking about how they had create an animal, right? And they were creating all sorts of things like the gnats, which are snakes and rats. And then like Jimmy's pet killer, the rakunks, raccoons and skunks. We haven't heard exactly what the wolvargs are yet, but we'll hear about them too. And so all of these things have been done, and now they're all released into nature. And what is that causing, and is that okay? Speaking of nature, the book is full of all sorts of climate change issues. So many hints and references to what's going on in the environment, right? He mentions that the leaves turn color then, which implies that they don't turn color now. He talks about the polar ice caps melting and the tundras bubbling with methane and all of these crazy things that have gone down. Snowman can't go out into the sunlight because he gets fried. So the sun or the ozone layer is so depleted that he can't go outside anymore. Oh, but that's the Craker kids. Their skin is UV resistant, so they can go out and play in the sunshine, and Snowman can't. So that's another thing we've learned about the Crakers, and I don't know how we feel about that. Um, there's also several hints that have come up already, right? Margaret Atwood is really good about not giving us direct answers, but she has already told us how long Snowman has been where he is now, and how far into the future the story takes place. She's also dropped some major hints about how it all turns out and what happens at the end, even though we can't catch those hints until we've read it and then go back. So on page 8, there's the clue about how long Snowman has been where he is now. He says at the bottom of the page that the Craker kids, they keep asking him questions, and he's like, however long he's been here, 2 months, 3, he can't remember exactly. So it's not like Snowman's been here for 10 years, which is what people automatically think because he's dirty and he's gross and he's got salt and pepper in his hair. He's not like a full-time resident there. It hasn't been very long. It's only been a couple of months. So that doesn't tell us a whole lot except for that this location where he is with this tree and his dirty sheet and the kids running around, this is relatively new for him. Um, the other big clue is how far into the future the story takes place, and that's on page 41. It's just a very subtle hint that's thrown in as Jimmy is talking about his life science teacher. And he calls him, let me find the exact quote. The life skills class in junior high. The teacher had been a shambling neocon reject from the heady days of the legendary dot-com bubble back in prehistory. Right? So that dot-com bubble should tip us off. We were alive for the dot-com bubble, right? It was the late 90s and the early 2000s. So we were there. We were there for that. And Jimmy's life science teacher, life skills teacher, had been part of the dot-com bubble. So this was when he was probably younger, the teacher, and now he's an older gentleman teaching life science in one of the compounds because everything has changed so drastically. But it tells us that we're probably only 30, maybe 25, 35 years from our future in 2015. So with that clue, Atwood's saying, look, I'm not talking about hundreds of years from now. I'm talking about a couple of decades. That's it. So I think that's important to keep in mind. One of the other things to keep in mind is as you're reading and you come across things that you don't know, right, you should circle them because they're probably important and they're probably going to come up again later. For instance, on page 7, when the kids are bringing up the bag with the stuff that they found, opening up their sack, the children chorus, "Oh, snowman, what have we found?" They lift out the objects, hold them up as if offering them for sale. A hubcap, a piano key, a chunk of pale green pop bottle smoothed by the ocean. Okay, so we know all of those things, right? We've seen a hubcap before, we've seen a piano key. But then it says a plastic Bliss Plus container, empty. A Chicky Knobs bucket o' nubbins, ditto. We don't know what those are. They are very clearly not from our reality. And if she does that and places these random things in the middle, it's worth it for you to circle them and be like, why are these important? And to remember to go back to them later when they do come up later, which they will. So when you read Atwood, you have to read very, very closely. You can't just skim for plot because it's so much bigger than that. What else? I think the only other really big thing, I want you guys to think about Jimmy and his upbringing and his relationship with his parents and how his mom has a name, but his dad doesn't have a name, and his dad's kind of a slimeball and marries Ramona, but then the mom takes off, and then he's constantly vying for their attention, but he doesn't feel like he ever lives up to either one of their expectations. So there's a lot of stuff going on with that. And then when his mom leaves and she takes Killer, it's like, I have to ask, does she love him? Or is she just guilt-ridden? Because she doesn't take him with her. So we can think about why that might be the case. But then we can also think about why she sends those postcards from Aunt Monica, right? She sends them, but every time she sends him a postcard, he gets questioned by the Corpsicore. It's literally putting him in jeopardy every single time. I don't know if you guys caught the reference, but when the mom left and the dad leaves for a while and Jimmy's there with those two ladies in the house, and then the dad comes back, it says his face was green and his eyes are red and puffy. Well, green doesn't mean like seasick green. Green means literally green because he was interrogated and he was beaten, right? And so bruises, I'm sure you guys know, when they start to heal, they turn a green color. So that's what Jimmy's dad was going through. He was coming back and he was recovering from being tortured for information about his crazy wife who left. So think about that. Think about why Jimmy is the way that he is, what we think about his relationship with his parents. And then the other thing I want you to think about is Alex the parrot. And so it comes up very briefly in this section, but Alex the parrot comes up over and over and over again throughout the novel. And so as a child, Jimmy's watching Alex the parrot on these old animal studies CDs, right? By the way, Alex the parrot was real. I put a link on our iLearn page so that you can see a video of Alex the parrot. But as he comes up throughout the book, I want you to think about what's triggering those memories in Jimmy and why Alex the parrot might be an important symbol to the book. Like, what does Alex the parrot represent? So that's a little bit of literary analysis stuff I want you guys to do. I think that was the majority of what I wanted to talk to you guys about. I'm really hoping that you're enjoying it. There's a lot of stuff in here. Everything's important. I think it's really interesting some of the things that Atwood attacks in this story. For instance, on page 71, when he's thinking about his old teacher, who he refers to as Melons, and he says that she would always lean over as he was working on his Rita screen, right? And so, Rita screen, and we're like, okay, well, what is that? Well, it's interesting because it makes us think of like an iPad or a Kindle or something like that. But Atwood's Oryx and Crake was published in 2003, and the Kindle, the first generation, wasn't introduced until 2007, and the first iPad wasn't introduced until 2010, right? So she's thinking about things way in advance, kind of like a forward thinker, like you have to do to take those, like play the strategy games that Jimmy and Crake play. So think about that too. And all of the stuff that she's bringing up in terms of science and technology, Google some of it. It's really interesting what you'll come up with. I'll actually be asking you guys to do that within the next couple of weeks. But on your own, you can look it up and be like, wow, what's going on here? So I think that's it for this week, and then I'll post another video or at least some thoughts about the next chunk of the book. It's so important that you guys are keeping up because there's so much reading to do, and then that's your final paper is the Oryx and Crake paper. So keep up, ask questions, fill out those questions, and you can always in your 321 sort of refer to my videos too and respond to them if you'd like that way. All right, guys, I will talk to you later.